Hello and welcome back to Chillers and Thrillers. I am your host, Em, and in this podcast, I read you stories of people's encounters with the strange and unexplained. No comedy, skepticism, or gore, only 100% true spooky tales. Before we get started with today's episode, please remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave me a comment telling me what your favorite story was. And if you can't think of a good story, just leave me a comment with your favorite emoji. The Fae, the Skogsrå, the Rougarou, the Kitsune, and the Doppelgänger, among many others, have appeared in folklore for centuries across cultures worldwide. They're often grouped under the idea of mimics or imposter spirits. Each of these beings are unique, but they all share one unsettling trait. They imitate something familiar, usually a voice, but sometimes a physical form, such as a woman or a baby, or even an animal. In Season 1, I covered Dopplegangers and Mimics, which remain one of my most feared paranormal entities. The big question has always been, what do they want? In German and Victorian lore, doppelgangers are seen as warnings or omens. The Fae and the Skinwalker, on other hand, imitate human voices, crying babies, loved ones calling your name, to lure people deeper into forests or the wilderness. The Skogsrå, whose name translates to forest guardian in Swedish, appears as a beautiful woman, but when she turns around, she has a hollowed, rotted back, and is known for drawing people into the woods. Then there are the everyday mimics, the imposter spirits and doppelgangers that copy people inside their own homes or workplaces. And again, the question remains, why? Some people believe the Fae and Skinwalkers lure people for darker purposes. Others think household mimics feed off the energy created by confusion, fear, and attention. They imitate the voices of loved ones because they know you'll respond, and in doing so, you give them exactly what they want. In this episode, I'll be recounting true stories of people who encounter these strange entities, whatever name you choose to give them. So, turn down the lights, get comfortable, and listen in. Dad's Mimic, submitted by user unauthorized. I can only assume what my mom and I encountered was a doppelganger. Before I start, my dad used to work at night. When I was around 6 or 7, I lived in a townhouse with my mom and dad, up until my mom passed away less than a couple of months later. She was pouring me some milk in the kitchen, like every other night, and I was winding down for school the next day. There was nothing scary about this night. I was just waiting for my mom to pour the milk, looking out into our living room in front of me, looking at things and just waiting. However, on one of my head swivels from looking around, my dad had appeared in front of a closet door in our living room. It didn't scare me at first, since I just assumed it was my dad, but looking back, there's no noise ever made. Our doors and floors creaked, and with how quiet it was, we would have heard anyone moving around. What was so scary about it was that my dad was just standing there, staring at us from across the room. It wasn't scary at first, since I was still under the impression this was my dad, but the longer he kept standing there and staring at me, the scarier it got. He didn't move an inch, didn't blink, and the longer I kept looking at him, I noticed his eyes were too small. They were wide open, but small enough that it looked wrong. I remember blinking and rubbing my eyes because I thought maybe I was seeing things, but it just kept standing there for a good minute longer. Then, after a blink, it disappeared. No noises at all. There was no way, considering it disappeared in a blink, for it to have humanly moved that fast without making some kind of noise. The only way it could have disappeared as fast as it did was if it had slammed the door shut behind it. I remember how terrified I was at that point and looking to my mom to see if she saw it too, but she didn't say anything, so I assumed I had hallucinated it for many years. That was until a few years ago, when I was telling my dad about that night, and he told me my mom had also seen it. But due to her mental health problems and me not saying anything to her or him about it, I hadn't said anything when I looked at her. He dismissed it as a hallucination. Nothing quite like that ever happened again to me, but that experience was the reason for years that I couldn't sleep without a light on. Before that day, I wasn't afraid of the dark. I didn't believe in ghosts, didn't even understand that people could actually die at that point, and wasn't really exposed to religion. Not then or recently either. Every night after that incident until we moved, I was petrified to sleep in my own room. My roommate, submitted by user Dr. Conrad Berner. This happened when it was about 4 in the morning, and I'm quite the night owl, so I'm headed downstairs to grab something to drink. The kitchen is separated from the living room by a dividing wall, but I realize someone is in there because I can see a person's shadow from around the corner. I think to myself, oh, my roommate must be up already. Maybe he has something to do. So as I turn the corner, I say, "Hey, roommate's name, good morning," and immediately feel like an idiot and get a chill up my spine because no one is in the kitchen besides me. I search the entire first floor of the house, and no one is there. So I head back downstairs and knock on my roommate's door. No answer, so I slowly open the door. My roommate is passed out asleep and doesn't seem like he'd wake me up anytime soon. There's no way he could have made it back up to his room that fast without running. And I would have noticed because the floors were creaky, especially on the staircase. When he woke up in the morning, I told him about what had happened. His eyes got real wide, and he turned pale. He looked me right in the eye and said, "That isn't a funny joke. Don't mess with me." Turns out, he had been having bad dreams all night about someone being in the house who shouldn't have been there. And whenever he confronted the person, he could never see their face. All that was there was a black silhouette. I haven't had that experience since, and we agreed not to talk about it. The Double, submitted by user Briar Patch Kid. I was having a tense conversation with someone who I was close to years ago. The conversation quickly devoted into a passive-aggressive fight that ended with the other person getting in the car and driving away. As I started heading back inside, the other person came back, got out of the car, and started our conversation again. The tone of voice was totally different, and the stance was different, and the feeling in the air was completely off. I don't know how to explain it, but as the conversation progressed, the other person started saying some really nasty and mean things that were completely out of character. I said, "This isn't like you, person," referring to their name, and they said, "What makes you think that I'm person?" I remember continuing the conversation and talking to them for a long time, but I don't remember anything specific. But slowly became more and more alarmed, knowing something wasn't right. I finally told them to go home. They complied and left, and I went back inside and started telling my sibling about the situation when the doorbell rang. Maybe 2-3 minutes had passed, and it was this person coming back to apologize for the original fight. They had been driving around town for a long time and didn't want to go home, leaving things unresolved. I asked why they had said some of the things from the last conversation, and they looked at me like I was crazy. They had no idea what I was talking about. They could have been lying, but the whole situation just felt dark, and it scared the hell out of me. I think we have a mimic. Submitted by user Usual Courage 1295. Okay, so I think we have a mimic in our house or following myself. I don't know if that's possible, but something's going on. To preface, we are a family of 5. Myself, my husband, and our 3 kids, 7, 2, and 0. My husband works the afternoon shift and gets home around midnight. So recently, we've had an increase in paranormal activity around our house. Prior to this, it was just personal experiences and I was alone in my experience, and just kind of assumed I was a little nuts. But now, my partner has experienced things, and I even caught something on video, which it won't let me upload for some reason. Here's a list of random experiences. My 2-year-old has a midday nap. I heard him get up, shuffle down the hallway, and saw him out of the corner of my eye, peeking around the corner as if he was playing peekaboo. He never popped back out. I got up to see him, and he wasn't there. He was still sound asleep in his bed with the door closed. He can't reach the door handle yet either. A few weeks ago, I was trying to get my 2-year-old to sleep in my bed. While we were laying there, I heard the sound of my 2-year-old crying over his monitor while he was with me. It was so terrifying, I cried. About a week ago, we switched our kids' rooms around. That night, I was again lying in bed with my toddler. I heard the sound of my 7-year-old singing, talking over the monitor, but quite muffled. Their rooms are now neighboring, so I assumed it was picking up sounds from his room. I got up to tell my son to be quiet and go to sleep, but he was asleep. I even shook him to see if he was pretending. He was dead asleep. My partner has heard doors slam late at night. My 7-year-old's alarm clock started going off at random hours of the night, and we have that feeling of being watched while we're up after midnight making bottles or with the kids that won't sleep. Also, I've been having these experiences my whole life, thinking I heard my partner come home, but he's not home yet. I even got out of bed one night. I heard him get up with me and follow me to the kitchen, only to turn around and find myself alone. The activity seems to have significantly increased and has happened in lots of houses, not this one alone. I don't know what it is or what to do. Is it targeting my children since it's copying them? Is it targeting us or me through copying my children and husband? And should I be worried? Grandma's House, submitted by user CRFRX7. When I was a kid, we had a lot of odd happenings at my grandmother's house. It was a very, very old house located next to a cemetery. A few people had died in the house before my grandmother lived there, and to this day, I still have creepy dreams about that place. On this particular afternoon, my grandfather was working, and my adult uncle, who lived with my grandmother at the time, was also gone with friends. It was me, my grandmother, and my younger sister, alone at the house with a couple of pets. I was probably about 7 years old, and my sister was 5. My grandmother loved to tell us ghost stories. We were sitting in her living room, my sister and grandmother on the couch, and myself on the love seat with a dog. The cats were outside as it was summer, and they loved to stay out during the day, so all living beings in the home were accounted for. As we were listening to my grandmother, I heard what sounded like muffled dog barking coming from downstairs. The house was multi-level with a set of stairs that went down to the landing and a front door. Then another set of stairs from there to the second living room, my uncle's room, and the laundry room. Neither my grandmother's sister nor the dog heard the sounds. Right after, I heard slow footsteps coming up the stairs. I told my grandmother, and she and my sister listened and heard the footsteps as well. We were all sitting there, looking at each other in silence, when the TV turned on by itself. The remote was sitting on the stand next to my grandmother, and nobody was touching it. The TV turned off, then back on again, then turned off. We were all really scared at this point, so my grandmother said we would go down the hallway into her room, lock the door, and watch TV there until my grandfather got home from work. We followed her down the hall, terrified because we had to walk by the stairs. We went into her room, laid down, and watched TV, and at one point I fell asleep. I woke up to knocks on my grandmother's bedroom door and heard my uncle say, "Mom, I'm home," which we found unusual because my uncle had a very loud truck that none of us heard pull into the driveway. I got up and opened the bedroom door, and there was nobody there. I slammed the door shut and ran to the window to look into the driveway. His truck was not there, so whatever this was trying to scare us and impersonating my uncle for whatever reason. She lived there for about 15 years after that, and while other things happened, nobody else was ever mimicked or heard a mimic to my knowledge. The mimic imitator. What was that with us? Submitted by user Confused Confuzzled. This story happened at one of my more recent job places. Sit tight, this one still gives me the chills. I worked at a boarding facility for dogs and cats. From day one, stuff was off. The first thing I noticed weird was hearing a voice behind me, and when I turned around, seeing no one there. Understandable enough with 20 to 70 dogs barking all around me for their lunch or playtime potty breaks. I kept discarding these things until one day, on top of a low kennel, a partially filled water container, like the ones you use to water plants with, flew at me. No way a dog could have hit it and sent it somehow flying horizontally at me. It missed me by an inch or so, and I felt the breeze of it flying past me as I walked by, and it hit the kennel across from where it was located. Hard. I knew something was up then, and still hadn't paid much attention. Shortly after, I noticed the metal doggy doors that lead from each kennel into an outside run would start swinging when I entered the kennel to clean. Or for anything, really. I would look at the doggy doors, both other sides, and no motion from them. If I stepped out of the kennel, the door would stop swinging. Well, it was nothing new for me to experience this kind of stuff, so what is one more story to add to the list? One day, a coworker got mad at me and called me. She said she saw me through the window and asked why I didn't go back and talk to her for a bit. I answered with the fact that I wasn't, nor had I been, anywhere near work that day. She thought I was kidding and went to the front desk to ask, and was told that no one, in fact, had been through at all for the past couple of hours. This happened 3 times with different coworkers, where they would see me from another room or yard and ask why I never stopped to talk, and it all happened on days I wasn't at work. This eventually progressed. I was moved up to being the bather for our location, so a lot of dogs, baths, and loud dryers going on for the pups. And I kept seeing, every time I was bathing a dog, my manager, and then friend, and also the person whose voice I heard the most when no one was near me, standing by my side. She would stand there, waiting for me to turn around and turn off the dryers so I could hear her. And once I did and turned towards her, no one was there. She would be busy with clients or not even in the building. At this point, some of the girls had already been discussing the weird going on. One friend and I said, roughly at the same time, "Oh, the mimic? Oh, the imitator?" And we looked at each other and smiled nervously. We had never even talked in depth about this stuff because, come on, how many people would even take us seriously? It turns out 2 other girls had heard or seen me or the manager more than once when we weren't there. And 2 more things stuck in my memory about this place. 1, we had a storm which led to power flickering on and off. From reception to the back kennel area was where the activity seemed to happen. It was visible through a large window, so clients could see where their fur babies were kept. As the lights flickered, 3 of us stood in reception past our shift in case we had an emergency. 2 of us were facing that window. Both of us, at the same time, saw a fast, non-identifiable shadow thing rush past the window, even higher than the top of the kennel doors, which are 6 feet tall. We saw this twice during the light flickers. The second thing that stuck was we had radios. We just often forgot to use them or even turn them off. One of my coworkers was outside with the daycare dogs there just to play for the day, when her radio clicked, and a voice she did not recognize say, "Spot's mom is here for pickup," and cut out. She went to answer, only to realize her radio wasn't on. She got the dog ready and took him to the front, where the receptionist said she didn't call for him, and she didn't have any radios on her either. We still don't know what it is or was that we experienced, but we do know it was out of the ordinary. The Outdoor Mimic, submitted by user Verdant Companion. This is creepy. I was lying in bed last night and remembered what happened to me a couple of years ago, wondering what it was. It was a winter night, and my not-so-good father was taking his anger out on me. I left the house and started walking down the road. We lived in a heavily wooded area, and the woods behind my house, since day one, always made me feel scared. I was the only one creeped out, though. I sat at the end of the road, about 5 minutes from my house. After what felt like forever, I was getting a bit cold and nervous, so I made my way back. I wanted to wait until my brother got home so I could hang out with him and get away from my father. I sat outside of my house, then I heard my name being called from the wooded area, and it sounded like my brother. I was wondering if my mom had called him to say I ran out of the house and to drive around looking for me. His car wasn't in the yard, but he was calling, asking where I was. To hear something at the edge of the woods echo and sound like your concerned and slightly annoyed sibling, I was about to get up and walk closer to him to tell him, "I'm here." Then, my brother's car pulls into the yard, and the voice stopped. I just felt so scared, but I'm glad to hear these occurrences are not unique to me. I know there was something out there. The Mimic, submitted by user RJ. I believe there was a mimic in a house that I rented years ago. I was renting with my brother, our cousin, and our friend, and it was a split level in a neighborhood rimmed by woods. The neighbors were great. Pretty much everyone we interacted with was kind and accepting of the 4 20-somethings with 2 dogs, one which was a hound whose barks reverberated through the neighborhood. In that way, it felt safe. The house seemed normal enough. There were 3 bedrooms upstairs and 1 downstairs in the basement. The mid-level had a living room that we barely ever used. The basement was the main hangout spot where we'd watch scary movies, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, WWE, and whatever sport was in season. It was only when 1 to 2 people were home that the mimics seemed to act up. At times, I'd be taking a bath on the top floor, and I'd hear my brother calling my name and talking to me. I'd get irritated. Clearly, I was busy, but it was my brother, so I wanted to know what he needed. It also felt odd that he'd be calling to me from the basement instead of coming up to talk to me through the door, or at least just texting. I called out and asked him what he needed, and the talking stopped. I got out of the tub, went and got dressed in my room, and went downstairs, frustrated. He wasn't home. He hadn't been home the whole time. I asked our other roommate if it was him, but he said no, and he thought it was odd I was yelling to my brother when he wasn't home. I shook it off as maybe I really was just being messed with, or even just imagining things. The mimics spoke to each of us, taking on our voices, and always someone who wasn't home. Another time, that same roommate thought he was speaking to me when he walked in the door thinking I was in the basement, home early from practice. I wasn't. When he heard me talking, I was miles away at the school where I coached. We had a whole conversation, and when he came downstairs to the basement, no one was there. Sometimes it took on my cousin's voice or brother's or my friends. We were all in the house, even when we weren't. Being the only girl living in the house, I didn't like when I knew I was alone. We all heard footsteps in the house at different points, but they weren't any of ours. The footsteps were along the top main hallway. They sounded like boots, so I initially assumed it was one of the roommates since they all worked construction. However, when you live with people long enough, you know how they move. This movement wasn't any of theirs. One day, someone came to the door looking for information about a past tenant, wanted for murder. The murder wasn't suspected to have happened in the house, but it was one of his last known residences. We let our landlords know and talked a bit with the neighbors about it, but never got an update. We just had the knowledge that someone who used to live there had possibly done something horrible, and now they were having trouble being tracked down. We locked the doors, and there were many. We started to close off access to our house for the outside world, because we felt the energy continued to shift into a darker, more confusing state. My brother moved out early, and the remaining 3 of us became pretty insular, mostly keeping to our rooms. Us remaining roommates still got along well and continued having movie nights or pizza and wings together, just less often. My brother would come back to visit sometimes. We all swapped around rooms, and I'm grateful for that because the room I moved into was bright and airy with its own bathtub. Even so, I still heard the footsteps, and I still heard the mimic talking from the basement at times. I knew enough to try to ignore it, pull my dog closer, and try to keep the energy in my space as light as I could. I thought more and more about moving home because the energy of the house was doing numbers on my depression. By the end, I felt vacuous. I wanted out. We lived in the home for 2 years, and it was an incredible bonding experience even with the odd occurrences. However, we didn't have the best relationship with our landlords. Moving out felt like a purge of the house's energy, of the random stuff you acquire that you don't need, and the fun, carefree times of our 20s together. Driving away one last time from the house, I legitimately felt the darkness shifting. I don't know if the mimic was attached to the house or one of us, but I believe I haven't encountered it since. I drove back past the house one time a few years later, and my whole body felt ill and unsettled. Whatever was there may still be there, but I hesitate to say it was in my head, because it was a shared experience. I've talked to my therapist, my psychiatrist, trying to figure out if it was my brain pulling tricks on me, but they haven't had any answers. My depression ebbs and flows, and I'm not making things up, or so it seems. I'm more sane than I thought I was, and that leaves so many incidents unanswered and unresolved. We all felt it, and so did those that visited us. Something was off, and something was watching. I wonder if it still is, but I don't ever want to go back to that place. A Fake Mom, submitted by user G4YF13R1. When I was 9, I stayed home sick from school. I distinctly remember that I wasn't actually sick, simply playing hooky to avoid bullying, as I did that a lot around that age. I woke up from a nap, turned on the TV in our living room, and scrolled through some channels when my mother suddenly leaned over the kitchen bar and stared at me without saying anything. I had been awake for a few minutes at this point, so I can't really blame sleep paralysis for all of this. Now, whatever this thing was, it was identical to my actual mother. It sounds weird to describe, but it's as if the only difference was that this thing, pretending to be my mom, had never felt a single emotion in its life. It was unsettling. It beckoned to me, and I attempted to talk to her as I would my mother. She kept beckoning, refusing to answer, and that's when I sensed something horribly wrong. Naturally, I started screaming at this thing to answer me, and it just kept beckoning. I bolted, running out of the room and into the yard, yelling for help. My mother, the real one, had been working in the yard and came rushing over. I told her what I'd just seen, and she soothed me with an easy explanation that I must have had a fever dream. But thankfully, stayed by my side for the rest of the afternoon, as I was a nervous wreck. And that's all for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. We have 2 episodes left this season, the Christmas special and the end of year special. I hope you'll join me. In the meantime, please make sure to share the podcast with your paranormally inclined friends and family. Leave me a rating and review wherever you listen. And if you have any stories you'd like to share to be featured in season 6, please email me at chillersandthrillers@gmail.com. In the meantime, I hope all you ghouls and ghosts stay safe, and I'll see you soon.